The messages themselves were not what destroyed Ethan Caldwell. It was the timestamps. One after another, they appeared beside ordinary moments he remembered with painful clarity. A message sent while he was helping their daughter study for an exam. Another sent during their wedding anniversary dinner. Another while Lauren sat beside him on the couch pretending to watch a movie. The affair had not stolen months from his marriage. It had stolen memories. And once Ethan understood that, he realized something even worse. The woman sitting across from him was no longer the woman he thought he knew. The rain arrived early that year in Portland. By the middle of October, the city seemed permanently wrapped in a gray curtain of clouds. Water gathered along sidewalks, reflected neon storefronts, and tapped steadily against office windows throughout the day. Ethan Caldwell barely noticed. At 42, he had developed the habit of moving through life with his attention fixed on responsibilities. Deadlines. Mortgage payments. College savings accounts. Project approvals. Client presentations. Love, in Ethan's mind, was measured by reliability. Every morning he woke before sunrise, prepared coffee, reviewed architectural plans, and left for work before most of the neighborhood lights turned on. Lauren used to admire that discipline. Now she wasn't sure she even saw it anymore. One Thursday evening, she stood in the kitchen preparing dinner while their 16-year-old daughter, Ava, worked on homework at the dining table. The front door opened. Ethan stepped inside carrying his laptop bag. "Sorry I'm late." Lauren glanced at the clock. 7:38. "You said 6. I know." He loosened his tie. The hospital project ran over schedule. Lauren nodded. "No argument. No visible frustration." That somehow felt worse. Ethan kissed her cheek before heading upstairs to change clothes. The gesture lasted less than 2 seconds. A routine. A habit. A task completed. Lauren stared at the cutting board long after he disappeared. Years ago, she would have followed him upstairs. Years ago, he would have explained every detail of his day before she even asked. Somewhere along the way, life had become efficient. Efficient marriages looked healthy from the outside. Efficient marriages also created silence. That night, after dinner, Ethan sat beside Ava helping her with a math assignment. Lauren watched them from the kitchen. He was patient. Attentive. Present. The same qualities that had made her fall in love with him. So why did she feel lonely? The question had been growing inside her for months. Maybe years. And she hated herself for asking it. Because Ethan wasn't cruel. He wasn't dishonest. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't absent. He simply seemed emotionally distant, as though every important part of him had been invested into protecting the family's future. Meanwhile, Lauren increasingly felt invisible in the present. A week later, a new senior strategist joined her department. Ryan Mercer. 38 years old. Confident without appearing arrogant. Smart enough to command attention but relaxed enough to make people comfortable. Lauren first met him during a Monday morning meeting. Nothing remarkable happened. No dramatic moment. No instant attraction. Ryan simply introduced himself and sat across from her. The meeting continued. Life moved forward. That should have been the end of it. But over the following weeks, they found themselves working on several projects together. At first, their conversations remained strictly professional. Marketing campaigns. Consumer analytics. Budget forecasts. Normal workplace discussions. Then one afternoon, after a long client presentation, Ryan stopped beside Lauren's desk. "You saved that meeting." Lauren looked up. "What?" The client was ready to walk. Ryan smiled. "Your presentation turned everything around." Lauren laughed awkwardly. "I don't think it was that dramatic." "It was." He shrugged. "You should give yourself more credit." Then he walked away. Simple. Forgettable. Harmless. At least that's what Lauren told herself. Yet she found herself remembering the comment hours later. Not because it was flirtatious. Because it wasn't. It felt sincere. Unexpected. Specific. Ethan used to notice things like that. He used to tell her she was brilliant. Creative. Talented. Now most conversations revolved around schedules and responsibilities. The contrast unsettled her. A few days later, Ryan complimented a proposal she developed. The week after that, he praised her leadership during a difficult negotiation. Again and again, he noticed things. Small things. Professional things. Yet each compliment landed with surprising force. Lauren didn't understand why. Or perhaps she did. Recognition had become rare enough to feel valuable. Winter approached. The days grew shorter. The conversations grew longer. Soon they were eating lunch together with coworkers. Then occasionally walking back from meetings together. Then lingering in conference rooms after everyone else had left. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secret. Nothing that would concern an outside observer. But something had started changing beneath the surface. One evening after work, Lauren sat in her car scrolling through social media before driving home. A notification appeared. Ryan. Great work today. Seriously. She smiled despite herself. Then typed a response. Thanks. His reply arrived almost immediately. Maybe. But you're better than you think. Lauren stared at the screen. A strange warmth spread through her chest. Not romance. Not yet. Something simpler. She felt seen. At home, Ethan was reviewing construction documents at the dining room table. Ava was upstairs. The television played quietly in the background. The house looked exactly like the stable life Lauren had spent years building. Yet as she stood in the doorway watching her husband work, she experienced an emotion she could not fully explain. Distance. Not physical distance. Something far more dangerous. The kind that grows slowly enough to go unnoticed. The kind that convinces people they still have time. The kind that changes everything long before anyone realizes a marriage is already beginning to drift. And neither Ethan nor Lauren understood that the smallest choices of the coming months would eventually lead them toward a future neither of them could imagine. A future built not from one catastrophic mistake, but from countless tiny moments that seemed harmless when they first happened. By December, Ryan Mercer had become part of Lauren Caldwell's daily routine. Not in any obvious way. Not in a way she would have admitted to anyone. But she noticed it whenever he was absent. She noticed it when meetings ended without his observations. She noticed it when her phone remained silent longer than usual. Most of all, she noticed it when she had something good happen at work and instinctively wanted to tell him before anyone else. The realization unsettled her. Lauren told herself it was normal. People formed friendships at work all the time. Adults spent more waking hours with colleagues than with their own families. There was nothing unusual about enjoying someone's company. At least that was what she repeated whenever a small voice inside her suggested otherwise. One rainy afternoon, she and Ryan found themselves alone in a conference room after a strategy meeting. Everyone else had already left. Ryan gathered his notes. Tough crowd today. Lauren laughed. The client thinks changing their logo will solve every problem. Half the companies in America think that. Their eyes met briefly. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, Ryan sat back down. You seem exhausted lately. Lauren looked surprised. Do we? A little. He hesitated. Everything okay? The question was ordinary. Yet something about the way he asked felt different. Genuine. Interested. Not polite conversation. Actual curiosity. Lauren looked toward the rain-streaked window. Just life. Ryan nodded. Life can be a lot. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Lauren found herself saying something she hadn't planned to say. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying 3 different jobs. Ryan smiled sympathetically. Work. Family. Everything else. Exactly. He leaned back. I get it. The conversation lasted only 10 minutes. But as Lauren drove home later that evening, she realized something. Ryan had asked how she was doing. Not what project she was working on. Not what deadline was approaching. How she was doing. The distinction lingered in her mind. At home, Ethan was in his office reviewing blueprints. The glow of dual monitors illuminated his face. Lauren stood in the doorway. Long day. Ethan looked up. Very. Everything okay? Just deadlines. He returned his attention to the screen. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. Lauren quietly walked away. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even disappointed anymore. Disappointment required expectations. And somewhere over the years, she had stopped expecting emotional conversations from her husband. That thought frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Because Ethan wasn't ignoring her intentionally. He simply existed inside a world of responsibilities and solutions. Whenever a problem appeared, his instinct was to fix it. Lauren increasingly wanted something else. She wanted to be understood. As Christmas approached, Ryan and Lauren's conversations became more frequent. They still discussed work. Mostly. But personal details began slipping into the spaces between professional topics. One afternoon Ryan mentioned his divorce. Not dramatically. Not as a confession. Simply as part of a conversation. My ex-wife used to say I spent too much time working. Lauren glanced at him. What happened? Ryan gave a small laugh. Honestly? We stopped paying attention to each other. Something tightened inside Lauren. The words felt uncomfortably familiar. Ryan continued. It wasn't one big disaster. He shrugged. Just years of small things. Lauren found herself thinking about Ethan. About missed dinners. Forgotten conversations. The way they often sat together in silence while looking at separate screens. The thought followed her home. That night she watched Ethan fall asleep within minutes of climbing into bed. The room was dark. Quiet. Safe. And yet Lauren felt strangely alone. For the first time, she wondered whether loneliness could exist inside a marriage. The answer arrived before she could stop it. Yes. After that, she and Ryan began messaging outside office hours more often. At first it was harmless. Articles. Industry news. Funny observations. Comments about difficult clients. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secret. Yet Lauren noticed she smiled whenever his name appeared on her screen. One Saturday morning, Ethan left early for a site inspection. Ava was spending the weekend with friends. Lauren sat alone drinking coffee when her phone vibrated. Ryan. Working today? She smiled. Unfortunately. His response arrived seconds later. Same. Maybe adulthood is just answering emails until we die. Lauren laughed aloud. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. When it ended, she realized she felt lighter. Happier. More energized. The realization should have concerned her. Instead, she focused on how good it felt. Weeks passed. The messages became routine. Then, expected. Then necessary. Lauren began sharing things she never mentioned at home. Stress. Anxieties. Professional insecurities. Ryan listened. Ryan validated. Ryan remembered details. When she mentioned an important presentation, he asked about it days later. When she discussed a difficult meeting, he followed up afterward. The attention felt intoxicating. Not because it was romantic. Because it was consistent. Meanwhile, Ethan remained consumed by work. One evening, Lauren tried again. They were cleaning the kitchen after dinner. I've been feeling overwhelmed lately. Ethan looked concerned. What's wrong? Lauren hesitated. There was so much she wanted to say. So much she couldn't seem to organize. I don't know. Ethan immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. Maybe you should take some vacation days. She looked down. Maybe. You work too much. He squeezed her shoulder. We both do. Then he returned to loading the dishwasher. Conversation over. Lauren stared at him. Part of her knew he meant well. Part of her knew he loved her. Yet another part felt unseen once again. She wanted connection. He offered solutions. The gap between those things continued growing. By February, Ryan had become the first person she messaged during stressful days. The first person she shared good news with. The first person she sought out when she needed encouragement. The shift happened so gradually she barely noticed it. Until one evening. Lauren was sitting beside Ethan on the couch. The television played in the background. Neither was paying attention. Her phone vibrated. Ryan. Hope you're feeling better. Lauren stared at the screen. A strange warmth spread through her chest. Not because of the words themselves. Because someone had noticed. She quickly locked the phone. For the first time, she felt guilty. Not because she had done anything inappropriate. Not because she was hiding an affair. But because she suddenly understood something. If something important happened tomorrow, her instinct would be to tell Ryan before Ethan. The realization hit her like cold water. She looked toward her husband. He was reading emails on his tablet. Completely unaware. Lauren felt a knot form in her stomach. The boundary hadn't been crossed. Not yet. There had been no declarations. No flirting. No betrayal she could point to. And yet something fundamental had shifted. A private emotional world now existed between her and another man. A world Ethan knew nothing about. For the first time, Lauren wondered whether secrecy itself could become a form of dishonesty. The thought stayed with her long after she went to bed. But the next morning, when Ryan's name appeared on her phone again, she answered immediately. And despite the growing guilt inside her, she couldn't bring herself to stop. Because what had started as friendship was becoming something far more dangerous. Dependence. Not on Ryan himself, but on the way he made her feel. Seen. Valued. Important. And without realizing it, Lauren was already taking the first irreversible steps toward a betrayal that neither she nor Ethan would be able to undo. By early spring, Lauren Caldwell had developed a habit she never intended to have. It began with small adjustments. Turning her phone face down during dinner. Taking a few extra seconds before responding to messages when Ethan was nearby. Closing certain conversations before someone could glance at her screen. Individually, each action seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern. A pattern Lauren refused to examine too closely. Because examining it would require acknowledging a truth she was not ready to face. The emotional affair had already begun. Not officially. Not in any way she would have described aloud. But somewhere between friendship and betrayal, a line had quietly disappeared. And Lauren no longer knew exactly where she stood. One Tuesday evening, she received a message from Ryan while brushing her teeth. The house was silent. Ava was asleep upstairs. Ethan was reading beside her in bed. Lauren glanced at the notification. Still awake. A small smile appeared before she could stop it. She replied. Unfortunately. Ryan answered immediately. I knew it. You seem like someone whose brain never shuts off. Lauren laughed softly. Ethan looked up from his book. What? Nothing. She locked her phone. Just something funny. Ethan nodded and returned to reading. The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet Lauren felt an unexpected flicker of anxiety. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, she did not want Ethan asking who had texted her. The realization lingered long after the lights went out. That night, while Ethan slept beside her, Lauren continued messaging Ryan beneath the covers. The conversation wandered from work frustrations to childhood memories. Then, future dreams. Then fears. The subjects grew increasingly personal. More intimate. Not romantic. At least not openly. But intimacy was no longer being measured by physical proximity. It was being measured by emotional access. And Ryan had more access to Lauren's inner world than her husband did. The next morning, Lauren deleted the conversation. She stared at the screen afterward. Her stomach tightened. Why am I deleting this? The answer came immediately. Because Ethan wouldn't understand. A second answer followed. Or maybe because you know exactly how it looks. Lauren pushed the thought away. Nothing inappropriate had happened. No flirting. No declarations. No physical contact. Deleting messages was simply avoiding misunderstandings. That explanation comforted her enough to move on. For a while. Meanwhile, Ethan continued noticing small changes he couldn't quite explain. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that pointed clearly toward betrayal. Just tiny inconsistencies. Lauren seemed distracted more often. She smiled at her phone frequently. Sometimes she appeared emotionally distant even while sitting in the same room. One Friday evening they attended a neighborhood gathering. Friends laughed around outdoor heaters while music drifted through the cool air. Lauren's phone vibrated. She checked the screen. Ryan. A simple message. Good luck surviving small talk tonight. Lauren smiled instinctively. Across the patio, Ethan noticed. Later, while driving home, he spoke casually. You seem happier lately. Lauren looked over. What do you mean? I don't know. He shrugged. You've been smiling more. She laughed nervously. Is that a bad thing? No. Ethan smiled. It's nice. The conversation ended there. Yet something about her reaction stayed with him. Not because it seemed suspicious. Because it seemed guarded. For the first time in years, Ethan felt as though there were parts of Lauren's life he could no longer see. He couldn't explain why. And because he couldn't explain it, he dismissed it. Marriage required trust. After 16 years together, suspicion felt ridiculous. The following weeks brought increasing emotional closeness between Lauren and Ryan. Their conversations now stretched late into the night several times a week. They discussed disappointments, regrets, relationships, aspirations. Topics Lauren rarely discussed with anyone. One evening Ryan sent a message that lingered longer than the others. You know, most people don't see how much pressure you carry. Lauren stared at the screen. Why would you say that? Because I pay attention. Her chest tightened. The words were simple. Yet they landed with surprising force. Because they reflected something she desperately wanted to believe. That someone truly understood her. That someone noticed. That someone cared. She reread the message 3 times before replying. Thanks. Ryan's response came seconds later. You deserve more credit than you give yourself. Lauren put the phone down. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. Across the room, Ethan was reviewing project documents. Completely unaware. The contrast felt unfair. Ryan received her thoughts. Ethan received her routines. And instead of confronting that imbalance, Lauren continued feeding it. One night, Ava unexpectedly entered the kitchen while Lauren was messaging Ryan. Lauren quickly locked her phone. The movement happened automatically. Too automatically. Ava paused. Who are you hiding from? Lauren forced a laugh. No one. Her daughter raised an eyebrow. That looked suspicious. Lauren felt heat rise into her face. It's work. Ava accepted the explanation and walked away. But Lauren remained frozen. Because for a brief moment, she had seen herself through someone else's eyes. And she didn't like what she saw. Still, she didn't stop. The human mind possessed remarkable abilities when protecting uncomfortable truths. Lauren increasingly relied on moral rationalization. Everyone needs friends. Nothing physical has happened. I'm not cheating. I'm just talking. Ethan isn't being hurt. The explanations became easier with repetition. Yet guilt remained. Small. Persistent. Growing. Then came another shift. One that seemed harmless at first. Ryan began sharing frustrations about his personal life. Dating disappointments. Loneliness. The lingering emotional scars of divorce. Lauren listened. Supported him. Encouraged him. Soon their dynamic changed from friendship into mutual emotional dependence. Both became important sources of comfort for the other. Neither wanted to acknowledge how unusual that had become. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan and Lauren were shopping for groceries. A perfectly ordinary errand. The kind of routine married couples perform thousands of times. Lauren's phone vibrated. Ryan. Hope your weekend is less boring than mine. Without thinking, Lauren smiled. Then immediately looked around. As though someone might have noticed. Ethan was comparing product labels nearby. He missed it entirely. Yet Lauren suddenly felt uneasy. Why had she reacted that way? Why did a message from Ryan affect her mood so quickly? The questions followed her through the rest of the day. That evening, Ethan finally voiced a concern. Not an accusation. Not even suspicion. Just concern. You seem far away sometimes. Lauren froze. What? Lately. Ethan spoke gently. I don't know how to explain it. He looked genuinely confused. You're here, but sometimes it feels like you're thinking about something else. For a moment, panic surged through her. Did he know? Had he figured it out? But Ethan's expression revealed only uncertainty. Nothing more. Lauren quickly recovered. Work stress. The explanation arrived effortlessly. There are a lot of projects happening. Ethan nodded. Immediately accepting it. Of course he did. It sounded reasonable. Because it was partially true. The best lies often contain pieces of reality. Ethan moved closer and squeezed her hand. We should take a vacation. Lauren managed a smile. Maybe. He kissed her forehead. An act of affection that once would have comforted her completely. Now it left her feeling conflicted. Because she knew something Ethan didn't. Her emotional life was no longer centered around their marriage. Not entirely. And while she continued insisting no boundary had been crossed, her actions told a different story. The deleted messages. The hidden conversations. The growing secrecy. The instinctive smile whenever Ryan's name appeared. None of those things looked innocent anymore. Even to her. Yet she kept moving forward. Because every step still felt small enough to justify. Every compromise still felt temporary. Every warning sign still seemed manageable. What Lauren failed to understand was that betrayals rarely announce themselves when they begin. They disguise themselves as comfort. As friendship. As understanding. As harmless exceptions. And by the time someone realizes how far they've traveled, turning back becomes far more difficult than continuing forward. Meanwhile, Ethan remained unaware that the foundation of his marriage was quietly shifting beneath his feet. He sensed movement. He sensed distance. But he trusted Lauren completely. And that trust would soon become the most fragile thing in their entire lives. April arrived with longer days and warmer evenings, but inside Lauren Caldwell's mind, the season felt anything but bright. For months, she had convinced herself that nothing truly inappropriate was happening. There had been no affair. No betrayal. No line crossed. Only conversations. Only friendship. Only a connection she happened to value more than she should. But those explanations were becoming harder to believe. Because the nature of her relationship with Ryan Mercer was changing. Slowly. Subtly. Dangerously. One Thursday evening, Lauren was sitting alone in the living room after Ethan had gone upstairs to finish work. Her phone vibrated. "Ryan. I saw your presentation today." Lauren smiled before opening the message. "And you looked incredible." She froze. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen. The compliment was different from previous ones. Not professional. Not about her skills. Not about her work. About her. Lauren's heart beat faster. A warning signal immediately surfaced in her mind. This is different. This is a boundary. Yet another voice answered just as quickly. It's only a compliment. Nothing more. She typed carefully. Thank you. A minute later Ryan replied. Just being honest. Lauren locked the phone and set it down. Then picked it up again moments later. Then reread the exchange. Then deleted it. Not because she wanted to forget it. Because she wanted to hide how much she liked it. That frightened her. More than she wanted to admit. Over the following weeks, the messages became increasingly personal. Ryan complimented her intelligence. Her sense of humor. The way she handled difficult situations. The way she carried herself. The way she made people feel comfortable. None of it was overtly romantic. Yet together they created something powerful. Lauren felt admired. Seen. Desired. The feeling became addictive. Every message produced a small emotional rush she increasingly anticipated. Every notification delivered a sense of excitement she no longer experienced elsewhere. At home, Ethan remained the same. Reliable. Loyal. Predictable. And that predictability, once comforting, now felt dull compared to the emotional highs Lauren experienced with Ryan. She hated herself for thinking that. Yet she continued thinking it anyway. One night, Ryan sent a message that lingered in her mind long after she read it. Have you ever wondered if you're settling for a life that isn't really yours? Lauren stared at the words. What does that mean? A response appeared. You spend your whole life taking care of everyone else. Work. Family. Responsibilities. When do you ever choose yourself? The message hit a vulnerable part of her she rarely acknowledged. Because lately, she had been asking similar questions. Questions she never voiced aloud. Questions she barely admitted to herself. Ryan seemed to understand exactly where those insecurities lived. And consciously or not, he kept feeding them. The conversations became less about work. Less about daily frustrations. More about dreams. Regrets. Missed opportunities. Alternative futures. Lauren began imagining versions of herself that had never existed. Versions free from obligations. Versions admired without effort. Versions who felt exciting and desired rather than predictable and familiar. The fantasy grew stronger each week. And fantasies rarely survive contact with reality. But Lauren wasn't thinking about reality. She was thinking about how Ryan made her feel. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed the distance growing. One evening, they sat together on their back patio as the sun disappeared behind neighboring houses. A rare quiet moment. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally Ethan looked at her. Are you happy? Lauren blinked. What? With us? The question landed heavily. Ethan's voice carried genuine concern. Not anger. Not accusation. Concern. Lauren looked away. A normal response would have been honesty. A difficult conversation. A chance to address what was happening before it became something worse. Instead, fear took control. Of course I am. Ethan studied her face. For a moment she worried he could see through the lie. But eventually he nodded. And the opportunity passed. Later that night, Lauren cried quietly in the bathroom after everyone had gone to sleep. Not because she wanted to leave Ethan. Not because she no longer loved him. Because she knew she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. Yet even then, she didn't stop. The validation was stronger than the guilt. And guilt, when ignored long enough, gradually loses its power. By early May, the company announced a major industry conference in Seattle. Several department leaders would attend. Including Lauren. Including Ryan. The trip would last 3 days. When Lauren first saw the itinerary, a knot formed in her stomach. Nothing had happened. Yet. But for the first time, she felt genuinely nervous. As though part of her already understood the risk. The week before departure, she considered pulling back. Creating distance. Limiting communication. Re-establishing boundaries. Every attempt lasted less than a day. The emotional dependence had become too deeply rooted. Ryan noticed immediately whenever she withdrew. "Miss talking to you." Simple words. Yet they erased her resolve every time. The conference began on a Wednesday morning. Seattle welcomed them with clear skies and cool air. The first day passed normally. Meetings. Panels. Networking events. Professional obligations. Everything remained appropriate. Everything remained controlled. Until the second evening. A corporate reception filled the rooftop lounge of a downtown hotel. Music drifted through the crowd. Conversations overlapped. City lights stretched across the skyline. Lauren and Ryan spent much of the evening together. Talking. Laughing. Drifting naturally toward each other. At some point, Lauren realized she was paying more attention to Ryan than anyone else in the room, including herself. Hours later, after most attendees had left, they found themselves standing alone near the terrace. The city glowed below. The night felt unusually quiet. Ryan looked at her. "You deserve to be happy." Lauren's chest tightened. The statement sounded familiar. It echoed months of conversations. Months of encouragement. Months of carefully reinforced fantasies. She looked away. "I am happy." Ryan didn't answer immediately. The silence felt meaningful. Dangerous. Eventually he spoke softly. "Are you?" Lauren couldn't respond. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure. The emotional tension that had been building for months suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Neither moved closer. Neither made dramatic declarations. Yet both understood something fundamental had changed. The relationship was no longer pretending to be friendship. Not entirely. Not anymore. That realization should have sent Lauren back to her room. It should have reminded her of Ethan. Of Ava. Of the life she had spent 16 years building. Instead, she remained standing there. Listening. Wanting. Questioning. And in that vulnerable moment, after months of emotional dependency, rationalization, secrecy, and self-deception, Lauren finally allowed herself to step beyond a boundary she had spent so long pretending still existed. The physical affair did not begin because of one reckless decision. It began because hundreds of smaller decisions had already prepared the path. Every hidden message. Every deleted conversation. Every secret smile. Every moment she chose Ryan's validation over uncomfortable honesty. The crossing itself was brief. The consequences would last forever. Back in Portland, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table that same night. Reviewing project documents. Planning next month's budget. Living inside a marriage he still believed was intact. Completely unaware that hundreds of miles away, the trust he had spent 16 years building had just suffered a wound from which it might never recover. And while Lauren would spend the coming days trying to convince herself she could still control the situation, the truth was already becoming unavoidable. The affair she once swore would never happen had finally become real. And reality was far less beautiful than the fantasy that had led her there. When Lauren Caldwell returned from Seattle, she expected certainty. She expected that crossing the boundary she had spent months approaching would finally answer the questions that had haunted her. Instead, everything became more complicated. The fantasy that had seemed so clear from a distance immediately began colliding with reality. And reality was messy. The moment she stepped through the front door, Ava ran toward her with a smile. "Mom." Lauren hugged her tightly. For a brief second, guilt hit her with such force that she struggled to breathe. Not because of what had happened in Seattle. Because of what she had risked. Because of the people standing in front of her. People who trusted her completely. Ethan emerged from the kitchen. "Welcome home." He kissed her cheek. The familiar warmth of the gesture felt almost unbearable. Lauren forced a smile. It's good to be back. But throughout dinner, she found herself unusually quiet. Ethan noticed. Ava noticed. Even Lauren noticed. The secret she carried seemed to occupy physical space inside the room. Every normal conversation felt unnatural. Every casual interaction reminded her of what she had done. That night, after Ethan fell asleep beside her, Lauren lay awake staring into darkness. For months she had imagined reaching this point. She had imagined clarity, freedom, answers. Instead she felt trapped between two conflicting realities. One reality was the life she had built. The other was the fantasy she had been chasing. And for the first time, she realized they could not coexist forever. The next morning, Ryan sent a message. Made it home? Lauren stared at the screen. The familiar rush arrived instantly. Followed immediately by shame. Yes. Good. That was all. No emotional confession. No discussion about what had happened. No acknowledgement that anything significant had changed. Lauren frowned. Months of emotional intimacy had led to one of the biggest decisions of her life. Yet Ryan seemed almost unchanged. At first she told herself he was being cautious. Professional. Careful. But over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Ryan still wanted her attention. Still wanted the connection. Still wanted the affair. Yet he seemed strangely detached whenever deeper emotions entered the conversation. One afternoon Lauren finally asked, "Do you ever think about where this is going?" Several minutes passed. Then Ryan replied, "Do we need to define everything?" Lauren stared at the words. Something inside her sank. Because she had been defining everything. Constantly. Every emotion. Every choice. Every risk. Meanwhile, Ryan appeared comfortable existing in uncertainty. That realization unsettled her more than she expected. The imbalance grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Ryan continued providing validation. Continued encouraging emotional closeness. Continued making her feel special. But whenever conversations approached the future, he stepped back. The contradiction confused Lauren. And confusion slowly transformed into anxiety. For the first time, cracks began appearing inside the fantasy. Meanwhile, Ethan was noticing changes of his own. Small things. Subtle things. Things that individually meant nothing. Yet collectively refused to leave his mind. Lauren guarded her phone more carefully than before. She often smiled while reading messages. Then quickly looked away. Sometimes she appeared distracted during conversations. Other times she seemed emotionally absent. As though part of her attention existed somewhere else. Ethan tried dismissing the observations. Everyone became distracted sometimes. Everyone experienced stress. Everyone changed. Still, the uneasiness remained. One evening he entered the kitchen unexpectedly. Lauren was standing by the counter holding her phone. The moment she saw him, she locked the screen. The movement lasted less than a second. Yet Ethan noticed. Lauren noticed him noticing. An uncomfortable silence followed. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." Ethan smiled. But the moment stayed with him long afterward. Not because it proved anything. Because it felt unfamiliar. Trust often erodes long before evidence appears. The human mind recognizes changes before it understands them. By June, Lauren's emotional state had become increasingly unstable. The excitement remained. The validation remained. But now guilt accompanied every interaction. Ryan's messages still brightened her day. Yet afterward she often felt exhausted. Ashamed. Conflicted. She began avoiding mirrors. Avoiding quiet moments. Avoiding difficult thoughts. Whenever guilt surfaced, she immediately buried it beneath rationalizations. My marriage was struggling already. Ethan and I were drifting apart. This isn't entirely my fault. Those explanations worked less effectively than before. Because another truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Ethan had not abandoned her. He had not mistreated her. He had not betrayed her. The problems inside the marriage had been real. But so was her responsibility for the choices she had made. That realization frightened her. Because accepting responsibility meant confronting consequences. And Lauren wasn't ready for consequences. Not yet. One Friday evening, Ethan suggested they go out for dinner. Just the two of them. Something they hadn't done in months. Lauren almost declined. Then guilt persuaded her otherwise. The restaurant overlooked the Willamette River. Soft lighting reflected across the water. The atmosphere felt strangely similar to places they had visited during the early years of their marriage. For a while, conversation flowed naturally. They talked about Ava, work, friends, future plans. Then Ethan surprised her. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking we should spend more time together." Lauren looked up. "What do you mean?" "I think we've both gotten lost in routines." His expression carried genuine sincerity. "We used to talk more." The words struck harder than she expected. Because they were true, painfully true. And because she knew exactly why that distance existed now. Ethan continued. "I miss you sometimes." Lauren felt tears threaten the corners of her eyes. Not because she wanted to cry. Because she suddenly remembered the man she had fallen in love with. The man sitting across from her. The man who still believed she was worthy of complete trust. For several seconds she couldn't speak. A confession hovered somewhere inside her. An opportunity. A chance to stop before things became even worse. But fear won again. Fear of losing everything. Fear of facing judgment. Fear of destroying the life she had built. So instead she smiled, reached across the table, and pretended. That decision would haunt her later. Because each missed opportunity to tell the truth made the eventual truth more devastating. As summer approached, Ethan's uneasiness continued growing. Not enough to form accusations. Not enough to imagine an affair. But enough to notice inconsistencies. Enough to remember odd moments. Enough to begin asking questions he had never asked before. Why did Lauren seem protective of her phone? Why did she appear distant and attentive at the same time? Why did certain explanations no longer feel complete? The pieces remained disconnected. Yet they were slowly gathering. And once enough pieces gather, patterns begin to emerge. Lauren remained unaware of how close she was moving toward disaster. She still believed she could manage both worlds. Her marriage. Her affair. Her secrets. Her image. What she failed to understand was that hidden truths rarely remain hidden forever. And somewhere beyond her awareness, the first threads holding her deception together were already beginning to unravel. The truth arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Not through a private investigator. Not through a suspicious neighbor. Not through a dramatic confession. It arrived because of a forgotten device. And because secrets, no matter how carefully protected, eventually develop cracks. The first crack appeared shortly after Ethan Caldwell's laptop stopped working. His old tablet, stored in a drawer for nearly a year, became a temporary replacement while he waited for repairs. The device had once been shared casually between family members. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. At least that was what Ethan believed when he powered it on. The tablet slowly synchronized years of saved accounts, applications, and cloud services. Emails appeared. Photos appeared. Calendars appeared. Messages appeared. Most of it was meaningless background noise. Then Ethan noticed something strange. Lauren's messaging application had synchronized as well. Normally, he would have ignored it. Privacy had never been an issue in their marriage. They knew each other's passwords. Neither had ever felt the need to check the other's devices. Trust had made such things unnecessary. But one notification caught his attention. A preview. A single line. "Ryan, last night was worth every risk." Ethan froze. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen. His mind rejected the words immediately. There had to be another explanation. A misunderstanding. A joke. Something harmless. Yet his pulse had already begun accelerating. Slowly. Reluctantly. He opened the conversation. And his life changed. Thousands of messages. Months of conversations. An entire hidden relationship. A second life. A second version of Lauren. One he had never known existed. Ethan sat motionless. The room felt unnaturally quiet. His breathing became shallow. The first messages seemed innocent enough. Work discussions. Compliments. Jokes. Friendly conversations. Then came deeper discussions. Personal frustrations. Marriage complaints. Private fears. Private dreams. Private vulnerabilities. Things Lauren had never shared with him. The further he scrolled, the worse it became. Every month revealed another layer. Every layer revealed another lie. Every lie revealed another betrayal. His hands trembled. Not from anger. Not yet. From shock. The emotional affair unfolded in perfect chronological order, like watching a building collapse frame by frame. He saw Ryan's compliments, Lauren's excitement, the growing emotional dependence, the flirtation, the secrecy, the deleted conversations that had somehow been preserved through backups. And finally, the messages from Seattle, the messages that removed all remaining doubt. The affair had become physical, real, undeniable. Ethan stared at the screen long after he finished reading. Something inside him seemed to disconnect. Not explode. Not shatter. Disconnect. As though reality itself had slipped out of alignment. Because the most painful discovery was not the affair. It was the timeline. The timestamps. Those simple numbers beside every message. Those ordinary little details destroyed him. Because each timestamp attached the betrayal to a memory. And suddenly the past began changing. Rapidly. Violently. Irreversibly. Trauma reframing. Though Ethan did not know the term, he experienced it in its most devastating form. A message from Ryan sent during Ethan and Lauren's anniversary dinner. He remembered that evening perfectly. Lauren had smiled across the table. She had raised a wine glass. She had kissed him goodnight. Now he knew she had been messaging another man in the restaurant bathroom. Another message. A Saturday afternoon. Ethan helping Ava prepare for an important exam. Lauren sitting nearby on the couch. Present. Smiling. Loving. At least that was what he had believed. Now the timestamp revealed she had spent that same afternoon exchanging intimate messages with Ryan. Memory after memory transformed. Every late meeting. Every business trip. Every unexpected smile at a phone screen. Every unexplained mood. Every strange silence. The pieces suddenly connected. Years of trust collapsed within hours. By the time Lauren arrived home that evening, Ethan was sitting alone in the dark living room. The tablet rested on the coffee table. The screen illuminated his face. Lauren immediately sensed something was wrong. Ethan. No response. She stepped closer. A knot formed in her stomach. Ethan. He finally looked up. And Lauren felt genuine fear. Not because he appeared angry. Because he appeared empty. The expression frightened her more than rage ever could have. His voice emerged quietly. How long? The blood drained from her face. For a brief moment, neither moved. Neither breathed. Neither spoke. The silence itself became the answer. Ethan looked down at the tablet. Then back at her. How long? Lauren felt her knees weaken. She already knew what he had found. The lies she had rehearsed for months vanished instantly. Nothing remained. Only reality. Please. Her voice broke. Ethan. How long? This time his tone carried something different. Pine. Pure pain. Lauren closed her eyes. Several months. The answer landed like a physical blow. Ethan nodded slowly. As though confirming a diagnosis. A terminal diagnosis. The death of something he had spent 16 years protecting. I read everything. Lauren immediately began crying. Not strategically. Not manipulatively. Genuinely. Because she understood in that moment that the fantasy was over. Completely over. Every secret. Every justification. Every carefully constructed lie. Gone. Ethan, I'm sorry. The words sounded pathetic even to her. Tiny. Meaningless. Insufficient. Ethan laughed softly. The sound was heartbreaking. Sorry. He stared at her. You were telling him things you never told me. Lauren cried harder. Ethan. You shared your fears with him. You shared your dreams with him. You shared your life with him. His voice cracked. And then you came home and shared the leftovers with me. Lauren covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Because every word was true. Every single word. The confrontation lasted hours. Not because they screamed. Because they talked. And sometimes talking hurts far more than shouting. Ethan asked questions. Lauren answered. Sometimes honestly. Sometimes through tears. Sometimes unable to answer at all. The more truth emerged, the more unbearable the situation became. Around midnight, Ethan finally asked the question that mattered most. The question buried beneath all the others. Did you ever love me while this was happening? Lauren broke completely. Because she knew exactly what he meant. Not whether she loved him. Whether she had truly seen him. valued him, respected him, while building a secret world with another man. And for the first time since the affair began, Lauren stopped defending herself. Stopped rationalizing. Stopped explaining. Stopped hiding. I don't know. The answer devastated them both. Silence followed. Long. Heavy. Final. Eventually, Ethan stood. For 16 years, Lauren had always viewed him as the strongest person in the room. Steady. Dependable. Unshakable. Tonight he looked older. Smaller somehow. As though an invisible weight had settled onto his shoulders. He picked up the tablet. Then looked at her one last time. Not with hatred. Not with anger. With grief. The kind reserved for things that cannot be repaired. The affair isn't what destroyed me. Lauren began sobbing. Ethan continued quietly. It was discovering that I was the only one living inside our marriage. The words cut deeper than any accusation. Because Lauren knew they were true. And because for the first time, she understood something terrifying. The greatest damage caused by betrayal is not the loss of a relationship. It is the destruction of reality itself. The victim loses not only the present. They lose the past. Every cherished memory becomes suspect. Every moment becomes evidence. Every act of love becomes a question. And as Ethan walked upstairs to spend the night in a separate room, Lauren remained alone in the darkness. For months she had feared being caught. Now she finally understood something worse. Being discovered was not the tragedy. The tragedy was realizing she had become the person capable of causing this much pain. And upstairs, unable to sleep, Ethan stared at the ceiling while years of memories continued rearranging themselves into a new and unbearable truth. The marriage he thought he had been living in no longer existed. Perhaps it never had. And by morning, nothing between them would ever be the same again. The morning after the confrontation felt unreal. Lauren Caldwell woke up on the living room couch. For several seconds, she forgot everything. Then memory returned. The messages. The tablet. The questions. The look in Ethan's eyes. The unbearable silence that followed. And suddenly the weight settled onto her chest again. Upstairs, she heard movement. A door opening. Footsteps. Ethan preparing for work. The sounds felt familiar. Ordinary. Yet, nothing about their lives was ordinary anymore. Lauren stood and slowly walked toward the kitchen. Ethan was pouring coffee. For 16 years, mornings had belonged to them. Now the distance between them felt larger than the room itself. Neither spoke at first. Finally Lauren broke the silence. I don't know what to say. Ethan stared into his coffee cup. Neither do I. His voice was calm. Too calm. The absence of anger frightened Lauren. Anger could be confronted. Grief was something else entirely. He picked up his keys. I'll be home late. Then he left. No goodbye. No kiss. No routine. No marriage. Lauren stood alone in the kitchen long after the front door closed. For the first time, she understood that trust was not damaged. It was gone. Completely gone. And there was no guarantee it would ever return. The following weeks became a nightmare neither she nor Ethan could escape. At home, they existed like strangers occupying the same space. Conversations were limited to necessities. Schedules. Bills. Ava. Nothing more. The emotional warmth that had once filled the house had disappeared. Ava noticed immediately. Teenagers often understood more than adults realized. One evening she finally asked, "Are you two okay?" Lauren felt her stomach twist. Ethan looked down at his plate. Neither answered right away. The silence itself became an answer. Ava's expression changed. Confusion. Fear. Sadness. Lauren wanted to explain. Wanted to tell her daughter everything. Wanted to protect her at the same time. Instead she whispered, "We're going through some things." Ava nodded slowly. But Lauren could see the hurt in her eyes. And for the first time, she truly understood that the affair had never been only about Ethan. Collateral damage was spreading outward. Touching everyone. Including the people she loved most. Meanwhile, another disaster was quietly approaching. One Lauren never anticipated. Inside the company, changes had begun after the Seattle conference. A routine internal audit reviewed travel expenses, communications records, and policy compliance among management staff. Normally, such audits were uneventful. This one was not. Several irregularities surfaced. Private meetings disguised as business expenses. Schedule inconsistencies. Documentation that failed to align with official conference activities. Individually, none of it proved an affair. Together, they raised concerns. Human resources became involved. Then legal. Then, executive leadership. Whispers began spreading through the organization. At first Lauren noticed only subtle changes. Conversations stopping when she approached. Coworkers exchanging glances. Unexpected meetings appearing on calendars. The atmosphere felt different. Tense. Observant. Watching. Then came the official request. A meeting with human resources. Lauren knew immediately. The moment she entered the conference room. The moment she saw legal representatives seated beside HR. The moment she saw printed documents on the table. The secret world she had spent months protecting was collapsing. And this time there would be witnesses. The investigation lasted several days. Professional. Clinical. Merciless. Messages were reviewed. Communication records analyzed. Policies examined. Facts assembled. No dramatic confrontations. No shouting. Just evidence. Cold and undeniable. Lauren quickly discovered something painful. The company did not care about romance. The company cared about policy violations. Conflicts of interest. Ethical concerns. Professional misconduct. Things that created legal risk. Things that damaged reputations. Things that threatened business interests. By the end of the week, the affair was no longer private. Not officially. But unofficially, everyone knew. Corporate offices functioned like small towns. Information traveled quickly. Judgment traveled even faster. Lauren felt eyes following her through hallways. She heard conversations abruptly stop. She saw sympathy from some coworkers. Disappointment from others. Contempt from a few. The humiliation became overwhelming. But the most devastating moment came when she turned to Ryan. Because throughout the entire affair, Ryan had always seemed steady. Supportive. Present. Someone who understood her. Now she needed that support more than ever. Instead, she discovered another truth. Ryan was protecting himself. Their first serious conversation after the investigation began took place in a parking garage. Lauren arrived anxious and desperate. Ryan appeared irritated. Not frightened. Not heartbroken. Irritated. "We need to be careful." Lauren stared at him. Careful? His jaw tightened. This could affect everything. Something about the wording bothered her immediately. Not us. Not what we've done. Everything. Meaning careers. Reputations. Consequences. Lauren folded her arms. That's what you're worried about? Ryan seethed. What do you want me to say? The answer struck harder than she expected. Because suddenly she saw him clearly. Perhaps for the first time. Not the fantasy version. The real version. A man who enjoyed attention. Enjoyed admiration. Enjoyed emotional intimacy when it benefited him. But now that consequences existed, he wanted distance. Protection. An exit. Lauren felt panic rising. Ryan. He interrupted. I think we need space. The words hit her like ice water. Space. After everything. After months of messages. Months of promises. Months of emotional dependency. Now he wanted space. Not because he was suffering. Because he was calculating. Lauren stared at him in disbelief. And for the first time, she understood something Ethan had realized weeks earlier. The fantasy had never been real. Not entirely. Ryan had encouraged her dissatisfaction. Encouraged her doubts. Encouraged the idea that she deserved something better. Yet now, when reality demanded sacrifice, he was retreating. Protecting himself. Leaving her behind. Within a month, Ryan accepted a position with another company. Officially, it was a career opportunity. Unofficially, everyone understood. He was escaping the fallout. Lauren watched him leave. Watched him walk away from the chaos they had created together. And she realized she was standing alone. Truly alone. At home, Ethan barely spoke to her. At work, her reputation was shattered. Ryan was gone. Friends had become distant. Trust had evaporated. The illusion that once felt so powerful now looked absurd. One evening, Lauren sat alone in her car outside the house. Rain slid slowly across the windshield. She remained parked for nearly an hour. Unable to move. Unable to think. unable to escape herself. For months she had focused on what she believed was missing from her life: validation, attention, excitement, recognition. Now all she could see was what she had destroyed: a marriage, a family, a man's trust, her daughter's sense of security, her own reputation. The realization arrived with brutal clarity. The affair had not solved a single problem. It had only multiplied them. And perhaps the cruelest truth of all was that Ethan had never been the obstacle to her happiness. He had been the person who loved her despite her flaws. The person who remained loyal when loyalty was difficult. The person she had taken most for granted. Now that person was slipping away. Maybe forever. And for the first time since the affair began, Lauren stopped feeling sorry for herself. Instead, she finally began understanding the true scale of the damage she had caused. The understanding came too late. But it came. And sometimes that is the beginning of the harshest punishment of all. Not public humiliation. Not professional consequences. Not losing an affair partner. But being forced to live with complete awareness of what you willingly destroyed. 9 months later, the divorce was final. The paperwork occupied less than an inch of space inside a courthouse file. 16 years of marriage reduced to signatures, dates, and legal language. Yet the true ending had happened long before the judge approved anything. It had happened the night Ethan Caldwell opened that tablet. Everything after that had simply been consequences. Autumn returned to Portland. The same rain. The same gray skies. The same streets. But Ethan was no longer the same man. The first few months after discovering the affair had nearly broken him. Sleep became difficult. Food lost its taste. Concentration disappeared. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt like a negotiation with pain. Yet slowly, something unexpected happened. The suffering stopped controlling him. Not because he forgot. Not because he forgave. Because he accepted. Acceptance arrived one difficult day at a time. Therapy sessions. Long walks. Honest conversations with friends. Time spent rebuilding trust in himself. Time spent strengthening his relationship with Ava. Time spent learning that survival and healing were not the same thing. For months Ethan had believed Lauren's betrayal had destroyed his value. Then he eventually understood a truth he wished he had learned years earlier. Her choices reflected her character during that period of her life. Not his worth. That realization changed everything. By the following autumn, people began noticing the difference. His posture was different. His confidence was different. His smile reached his eyes again. The grief remained part of him. But it no longer defined him. For the first time in years, Ethan felt genuinely free. Meanwhile, Lauren's life moved in the opposite direction. The consequences she once feared had become permanent realities. The promotion she had expected never happened. Professional opportunities quietly disappeared. Several friendships never recovered. Some people remained polite. Very few remained close. Trust, once lost, proved far harder to rebuild than she had imagined. But the most painful consequence wasn't professional. It wasn't social. It wasn't financial. It was emotional. Ryan Mercer had vanished from her life almost entirely. The occasional message that survived after his departure eventually stopped. The relationship that had once felt powerful enough to risk everything for ended not with love, but with silence. That fact haunted Lauren. Because it forced her to confront the truth. The fantasy she sacrificed her marriage for had not even survived the consequences it created. Some nights she reread old messages. Not because she missed Ryan. Because she was trying to understand herself. Trying to identify the exact moment when she began valuing validation more than honesty. The exact moment when attention became more important than loyalty. The exact moment when she stopped protecting the people she loved. No answer ever came. Only regret. Deepening regret. And regret, unlike grief, rarely offers healing. Then came the Charity Gala. One of Portland's largest annual fundraising events. Business leaders. Community figures. Non-profit organizations. Hundreds of guests. Lauren had considered declining the invitation. At the last moment, she attended anyway. Partly out of obligation. Partly because she was tired of hiding. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Conversations echoed through the crowd. Music drifted softly through the room. For nearly an hour, Lauren moved through the event mechanically. Smiling when appropriate. Making polite conversation. pretending everything was normal. Then she saw him. Across the ballroom. Ethan. The sight stopped her completely. Not because he looked dramatically different. Because he looked peaceful. Genuinely peaceful. He stood among a group of people engaged in conversation. Relaxed. Confident. Comfortable. Alive. The change was unmistakable. For months Lauren had secretly imagined he might still be suffering. Still trapped in the devastation she created. Still carrying the same weight. Instead, she was looking at a man who had continued moving forward. A man who had rebuilt himself without her. The realization hurt more than she expected, because she suddenly understood something she had avoided admitting. Ethan had not needed her to heal. He had healed despite her. As the evening continued, Lauren found herself watching from a distance. Not obsessively. Not hopefully. Simply observing. At one point Ethan laughed at something someone said. A genuine laugh. The kind she had not heard from him in years. The sound struck her harder than any insult could have. Because she remembered when that laugh belonged to their home. Their dinners. Their vacations. Their marriage. Now it belonged to a future she would never share. Later that evening, their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. Neither looked away. Neither approached. Neither smiled. There was no hostility. No anger. No bitterness. Those emotions had burned out long ago. What remained was something quieter. Finality. Eventually, Ethan walked over. Not because he wanted reconciliation. Because avoiding her would have been childish. Lauren's heart pounded. Hi. Ethan nodded politely. Lauren. His voice was calm. Friendly. Distant. The distance hurt most. They exchanged a few simple words. Nothing significant. Nothing emotional. Nothing unresolved. Then silence settled between them. Lauren looked at him. Really looked at him. And suddenly, with devastating clarity, she understood everything. The richest part of her marriage had never been excitement. It had never been passion. It had never been constant validation. It had been trust. The quiet certainty that someone would remain beside you even when life became ordinary. The comfort of being fully known and fully accepted. The safety of loyalty. She had traded all of that for a fantasy built on attention. A fantasy sustained by compliments. A fantasy that collapsed the moment consequences appeared. Ryan had made her feel special. Ethan had made her feel secure. At the time, she believed the first was more valuable. Now she understood how catastrophically wrong she had been. Tears gathered in her eyes. Ethan. He waited. She struggled to continue. There were so many things she wanted to say. Apologies. Regrets. Confessions. Explanations. But none of them mattered anymore. Because some damage exists beyond repair. And both of them knew it. Finally she whispered. I'm sorry. The words sounded exactly as they had sounded months ago. Small. Insufficient. Powerless. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. Not in forgiveness. Not in reconciliation. Simply acknowledgement. I know. Those two words carried no cruelty. And somehow that made them even more painful. Because they contained the truth. He knew. He knew she regretted it. He knew she suffered. He knew she wished she could change the past. And none of it changed reality. A few moments later, someone called Ethan's name. He excused himself politely. Then walked away. Lauren watched him disappear into the crowd. And for the first time in her life, she fully understood irreversible loss. Not the loss of Ryan. Not the loss of status. Not the loss of a marriage certificate. The loss of a future. The future she once possessed and casually risked. The future she believed would always remain available. The future now gone forever. As the evening continued around her, Lauren remained standing alone beneath the ballroom lights. The noise of the crowd faded into the background. Only one thought remained. She had spent months convincing herself that the grass was greener somewhere else. She had chased validation, excitement, and fantasy. In the process, she destroyed something real. Something rare. Something irreplaceable. And the cruelest part was not losing it. The cruelest part was finally understanding its value only after it was gone. Forever. Some betrayals begin with a single choice. Most begin with 100 small ones. A compliment accepted too eagerly. A secret conversation justified as harmless. A boundary crossed quietly. A lie told for convenience. People rarely destroy their lives in one dramatic moment. They destroy them gradually, while convincing themselves they remain in control. Ethan's victory was not revenge. It was recovery. He reclaimed his dignity, his peace, and his sense of self without needing to punish anyone. Lauren's punishment was not public humiliation. It was clarity. The unbearable clarity of seeing exactly what she had sacrificed and knowing she would never get it back. Because trust, once broken deeply enough, is not always replaced by hatred. Sometimes it is replaced by absence. And absence is often permanent. In the end, the affair gave Lauren everything she thought she wanted for a brief moment. And cost her everything she truly needed for the rest of her life.